But my philosophy is very simple. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, say something, do something, get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble.
Strength and solidarity. The strength and solidarity. Divided is our nation, combating and fighting hatred. The mission, should you choose to accept it, is fighting racist. Psychology is just a space where we run in our simulations. We load you up with the tools, then we plug you into the matrix. So have a seat on the couch, now tell me your situation. Take a look in the mirror, be honest, just who you facing. Marginalized as a youth, what challenges were you faced with? Feeling you wasn't equal, told that you wouldn't make it. Your ID isn't real, got you constantly trying to fake it. Hiding behind masks in the closet till you can't take it. Getting harder to breathe, someone choking you on the pavement. Unspeakable violence attacking you cause you Asian. Accomplices we accomplish through collaboration, engaging, educating, evaluating one another, liberating the future of all our sisters and brothers, empowering, elevating all communities of color. Strength and solidarity. The strength and solidarity.
The Strength and Solidarity podcast is a conversational piece that invites scholars, community activists, leaders, artists, and entrepreneurs to discuss their work as accomplices in cultivating cross-racial ethnic solidarity. Hosted and produced by Pooja Mamidana and Dr. Donna Demanari, our podcast team also includes our podcast interns, Alexis Rios and Petra Zadroga. The Strength and Solidarity podcast strives to engage, educate, evaluate, and empower communities of color one episode at a time. Our guest today features Saahas Patil. Saahas is a professional singer, songwriter, and musician based in Los Angeles. He began singing at the age of 12 in middle school in choirs and eventually moved to singing for a band. In 2009, he completed a vocal performance course at Nathaniel School of Music, Bengaluru, India, after which he joined the band Allegro Fudge as lead vocalist and songwriter. The band's first album, Maximum City, received critical acclaim from media, both digital and print. In 2015, Saahas moved to Los Angeles to study vocal performance at Musicians Institute, Hollywood. He was the recipient of 3 different scholarships and received a scholarship for a membership at the Recording Academy's Grammy U Foundation. He began writing songs for producers and other artists, as well as writing and recording for his solo act as a singer-songwriter. Saahas has taught vocals, guitar, and piano at low-income schools and after-school programs, as well as music schools around Los Angeles. He continues to teach vocals and guitar to students in Los Angeles, while also working on his A&R startup, Who Wrote That Song? He is Apple certified in Logic Pro X and uses Pro Tools to record, mix, and master frequently. Saahas was awarded Best Alternative Artist, Best Alternative Song, and Best Male Rock Artist at the 10th Annual Indie Music Channel Awards for his song, California. He has also sung on short films like Unreal Estate 2017 and Long Island Wolf 2016. He is currently a singer with Ben Mallare Entertainment and Bonnie Foster Productions, and spends his weekends traveling and performing. Hi, Saahas. Welcome to our podcast of Season 2, Strength and Solidarity with Dr. Donna and I. So happy to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you too.
So we'd like to begin, if you could share with our listeners and share your journey in your chosen career paths.
So music is my chosen career path, and I think it's more of it choosing me than me choosing it. I think it was really overwhelmingly impactful to me right since I was a kid. I never knew I could sing until my music teacher in the fifth grade told me I could. And then he put me into a bunch of choirs. And then during those choirs and 4 years of being in them, it's the experience of listening to music and harmony. It really impacted me at a very deep level. And I think that sort of stayed with me all the way till now. I eventually started writing music when I was 13 and 14. And then I started to play this music with other people that would play instruments. So I would really get them to learn songs that I wanted to sing and force them to play it with me. And then we'd form bands and then we'd play really bad shows. And then eventually I got into playing for a professional band when I was like 19. And that really was the start of a more professional side of music for me. And eventually I did that for about 6 years. And then I moved to the US and I continued to study music and write and create. And that's what I continue to do, and I perform as well. So that's where I'm at right now, and it's been my life has mostly been just revolving around music since then. So that's what it is.
Was there any particular event in your life, like in your journey, that was particularly impactful for you?
I think listening to some of my favorite artists and certain songs really stood out to me, and they still do. They come back to me at very important points in my life and important moments in my life. Um, I remember one moment when I was 16 or maybe I was 18. Yeah, I was 18. And I was super influenced by music. That's all I wanted to do. I used to cut class and just walk around the streets listening to music and air drumming. That's how I learned how to drum and eventually started to do that on my records and stuff. But I remember just being very carried away and influenced by what I was listening to at the time. Um, there was really nothing else that I wanted to do. So that was my life at that point. And so, like I said, I was part of some really bad bands at that point. We were playing some really bad shows. And I think that's a part of every musician's growing up. You need to do that. But at that point, I was really frustrated that the people that I was playing with, they weren't as excited as I was about the music that I was writing. So I was writing a whole bunch of songs and I'd introduce them at these practices and these rehearsals. And I would be like, okay, you can do this and this and this. And everybody would be really excited at that point. But then I expected them to be super excited about it even after they went home, which is what I was. But I didn't see them share the same enthusiasm. And for me, that was frustrating. So I was like, okay, how do I get this excitement from everybody? And then at the same time, some other friends who were musical but not as into it as I was were getting these really great musical opportunities. And I remember at that point being so frustrated, as in, because I was like, I know I'm good. I know I can do this. And I know I'm talented. But why is nothing happening at this point? Why is it not happening in the way that I want it to happen? So I just kept following the music through those moments of frustration. That moment definitely stood out to me. And a lot of times when I'm talking to other musicians, I find that they have similar moments in their lives, people that have continued to make it their career, where there's a moment of frustration where that isn't completely realized, and you just have to keep pushing through that. So eventually I did, and I just kept following the music, and things worked out. So that's what
How does
that's a good moment.
how does your family feel with your journey as a musician, as an artist?
Well, they're fine with it now. They're cool with it. I think they started to accept it when I was in my early 20s, when I started playing professionally. Um, so when I was in this period of discovery, which to me is the most beautiful time of music, when you're into it. Um, when I was 16 and 17, I was cutting class and just walking around, listening to music, trying to play music as much as I could. And at some point, my mom found out and she just went crazy. And so they both sat me down, my mom and my dad, and they were like, okay, listen, because they really thought I'd drop out of high school and just play music full time. Um, So they sat me down and they were like, okay, listen, you have to get a degree before you do anything. Please get your degree and then you can choose what you want to do. And so I eventually did get a degree in engineering, which is a very Indian thing to do, or like a medical degree, I guess. And initially, my dad did want me to do a medical degree because he was a doctor himself, but I just couldn't take to it. Music was just, there was no question about it. It wasn't even thought of as like this big future thing that I want to get to. I just wanted to be in that moment with music all the time. And so my parents, seeing this, really, were concerned that I would drop out, and so that's why they sat me down. But then later on, when I started playing professionally, they started to see me in the newspaper, or like they would see videos of me on TV, or hear me on the radio, and then they started to accept that maybe, okay, this is something that's serious, and he might have a future with this. And then they were really cool about it. There was this big switch when I was doing my engineering, because I was doing more music than engineering at the time, even though I was an engineering student. I was constantly looking for those times that I would be playing music outside of engineering. And when they started to see me outside of, well, in their newspapers and the magazines, they started to accept it, and they started to get really encouraging about it. And they would show their friends my songs and my videos and stuff. That was cute. Yeah.
Like earlier you spoke about a musician's journey and how every musician has like a common intersection with their identities of, especially as artists, when you first start off, it can be challenging, and it's continuing to keep that hope going. So how did you kind of cope with those expectations, that people weren't as excited, or you were continuing to look for those opportunities? How did you keep the hope going?
That's a great question. I don't think there was any sort of like, oh, I need to motivate myself and I need to push myself like I do now. There are moments like that I have to push myself right now. But back then, I think just listening to music or just being around it was consolation in itself. Like that was the biggest act of joy, was just being surrounded by music the whole time. And so for me, when I didn't see what I wanted to see happening around me, I would just try to find music and play it. And that's what got me through. I would just continue to look for it. I literally just, anytime I would hear music being played, and you can tell when it's music being played as opposed to it being played on like a speaker or something on from a music player, I would just follow the sound and I would just go there. And that's how I made so many of my friends that I'm still friends with today, that I still play music with today. I would just walk in on their sessions and then just say, hey, I can play, can I do this? And then they would like be really weird about it, but then they eventually accepted me into the circle. And so I just did that, and that was validation in itself. The act of playing music motivated me in itself to get past all of those moments. And so it wasn't really like, oh, I need to like keep pushing. It was just like, let's just keep playing music. And eventually that led me to doing a short course in vocal performance at a school in Bangalore, which was Nathaniel School of Music. And at that point, I remember, like I said, all of my friends were doing some cool musical stuff, and I'm like, why is nothing happening for me? So then I joined the school. I was like, okay, let's see what can happen through this. And then eventually, after I graduated, after like 3 months of doing that, the founder of the school called me and asked me to join his band as a singer. So that's what started my journey professionally as a musician.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any difference with the challenges that you faced when you were, back in India versus to when y'all moved here to the United States?
Totally. I think being a musician is a big challenge. It comes with a lot of uncertainty. There isn't a real clear path defined for you when you set out to be a musician, and it definitely isn't defined in India, especially the music that I was trying to create and write. For whatever reason, my first language is English, I think, and write in English, and that isn't super widely accepted in India. As in, it's not the most popular form of music in India. not that I ever thought of it that way. I just wanted to just write and do things that my heroes, my musical heroes, were doing. I never thought about, oh, is this going to be accepted? I just wanted to do it. But now looking back at it, there wasn't much of a path forward in terms of how it was going to be accepted. So I think that's a big challenge for musicians, especially in India. There isn't really a defined system. Here in the US, and working professionally as a musician for 5 years now, there's a clearly defined path for musicians, and you do have the capacity to make a living, even if you're not like super big time and like on the Billboard charts or whatever. There's still a big space for you, but in India there isn't. That was one of the biggest challenges. Also, things like when you're playing shows in India or concerts or even festivals, there's not much respect for the artist. I remember playing this fest called Oktoberfest in, I think it was 2011 or 2012. And it was this big festival in Bangalore, and a whole bunch of indie musicians from around the country were playing, and from outside of the country too. And we weren't like that far down the lineup at that point where we could be a headliner or anything. And so I remember being treated with a lot of disrespect at that point because we weren't the main acts or the headlining acts. And that's just a prevalent theme. There's a lot of like just condescension towards musicians at that point. So that's something that happens in India. It doesn't happen that much here, or at all here. So yeah, well, and when it comes to the US, I think the concept of not having a defined path just stays. It's music isn't really very clear in what what your choices are. But yeah, those are the challenges that I've faced so far, both in India and the US.
What made you choose US as a place to pursue music?
So this is like there's a moment behind this. So I was writing a lot of music in 2013 and 2014, outside of my band, which is more of my solo music, which is eventually what I bought here. And in 2014, I remember watching this video. It was 30 Seconds to Mars, Jared Leto's band, and it's the song City of Angels. And there was this extended video that he had released for the song, which features a lot of talking from, basically interviews with celebrities who live in LA, and also just homeless people that live in LA. And I watched that whole video, and I'm watching all of these celebrities and these homeless people and these regular people just talking about their experiences with LA. And it was, I don't know what it was about that video, but after watching it, I was like, okay, this is where I need to be. And there was no question about it. After watching that video, I'm like, okay, now I need, and I had never for a second thought about LA before that. I kind of knew that it was, okay, this is where all the movies happen and all the music happens, and this is where all the record labels are. But I never thought about like actually pursuing the future. But after that video, I'm like, okay, this is where I need to be. And then I eventually moved and studied here. So yeah, that's what made me get here.
Yeah, I like how in your journey you really follow your heart and you follow where you need to go and you need to be, and that's very inspiring. And so something I can relate to with you is I'm also from Bangalore, and I think growing up and being raised in like a city like India, in a country like India, and then like moving here to the US in your young adult life, I know I've had my fair share of like challenges with the way my identities intersect. So I'm just wondering, in your life, as a musician, how do some of your identities intersect? And could you speak more of any challenges with the intersection of your identities that do happen in the United States?
Right. Yeah, that's a deep question. That's the more you think about it, the more you find that, all of these things start to influence your chosen career path or your identity. And identity comes from so many different things. At least that's what I think. And I think the first thing that strikes me is that me growing up in Bangalore in India, I think you and I especially, we were like part of this generation that was sort of in between. We were kind of confused as to where we actually were, because the older generation, our parents and grandparents, they were firmly rooted in Indian tradition and traditional Indian um, practices and culture. But we were being westernized a lot at that point. The content that we were consuming, the music that we were listening, at least me, I was listening to a lot of, Western stuff at that point. And come to think of it, I only listened to Western stuff. And then I was watching a lot of like Friends on TV or like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and stuff, and that's what they would show us on, primetime TV. And so, and when we went to school, we would talk in English. That was our first language. We would talk about Western stuff that we watched, and eventually, the music that I started to listen to and was influenced by was because I was in a very westernized section of Indian society. Um, and that I think has to do with, colonialism in some way. I think we're the product of colonialism, because that's what it resulted in, is us being able to speak and think in English. It, as bad as what this is, something that is part of our identity, something that we carry forward. That definitely strikes me, a lot, because when I come here and then I tell people, oh, I'm from India, and they're like, oh, you don't have an accent. Oh, you don't. How do you speak English so well? I was
Wow.
like, this is my first language, and
Mhm.
it's what I speak and I think in, and I write in, and so that is something that I hear a lot when I'm talking to people here. But also in terms of identity, I think there's what you try to be your heroes when you're growing up. And for me, that was musical heroes. I was listening to a lot of singer songwriters like John Mayer, Ed Sheeran, and a lot of bands like Dream Theater, Nickelback, Switchfoot, and those guys really influenced me for better or for worse. And I was trying to, and this was completely unintentional. I never consciously thought about it. I just loved what I heard, and I was so affected by it, and I wanted to produce that same feeling that I was getting when I was listening to this music. And so I guess it did form my identity, in terms of who I was and who I shaped myself out to be, because music was such a big part of it, and trying to be like my musical heroes and trying to write like them and trying to, make music like them. Um, but yeah, growing up in a westernized society and in India, and just trying to be my musical heroes, I think those definitely shaped my identities. Um, and I think it can be tough if you don't know who you are, and especially when you move countries. That's such a it because you are, everything around you, every person that you, because when you are growing up, you have your circle, your family, your friends, and that becomes your cushion, your little bubble. And so you're going through all of these tough moments or even happy moments and every type of moment in this bubble, and you're encouraged and supported by people. When you make the decision to move to another country, which is, I think one of the bravest decisions anyone can make, to immigrate to another country, you are everything, that bubble is just completely gone, and all that's left of you is you and your talent. And you have, at that point, everything that you think you know about yourself, it just evaporates, and you're like, okay, who am I truly? And this is who I'm going to be in this situation where nobody knows me, and I'm going to have to create some sort of an impact when I'm on stage. And at that point, it just becomes how good you are with your songs and your singing and your guitar. And um, and yeah, so you have to be confident about who you are and who you want to be in your identity, because things will push you around, especially a city like this in LA, and an industry like this. It's so, it can be very forceful in the way it pushes you. So yeah, that that's a great question, very deep question.
Pooja has a lot of deep questions. I really appreciate
I
that
love
about
it.
her.
I'm all about deep questions. I love it.
Well, I am actually, and thank you for mentioning about, colonialism and your own experiences with microaggressions here. And that's definitely something that I can relate to. Like, oh, you speak English so well, that sort of thing. Um, I'm actually curious because I have to admit that I haven't heard your songs until Pooja mentioned it, and I'm just blown away, especially your song California.
Thank you.
Now, is there any particular genre of music that you tend to be drawn towards, and the type of music that you are inspired by?
Yeah, I do. I think it's more indie alternative, and it kind of blends in with singer-songwriter type of music. I think it always starts with a singer-songwriter perspective because it's just me sitting with my guitar trying to figure out what I'm feeling and writing down words based on what I'm feeling. And then it starts to adopt this other shape, which is more indie alternative. And that's definitely the sound that I was going for with that song. Kind of like the Strokes or, just Arctic Monkeys. James Bay had a song out that I really loved at that point. And I was trying to draw from his sound a little bit. And so, that's what the sound is, and that's what dictated it. Yeah.
I feel like when you were talking about your journey, right, it kind of resonated in that song, California.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It did. Yeah, that was, so I wrote that song much before it was actually released. So I released that song in around 2021, but I had written it in 2017. And me and my friend, who's also from India, he's from Chennai, and he's back there now. But at that point, had just graduated, and he's this really talented musician. And I had this idea, the whole song, basically just the guitar and I played it for him. He was like, dude, this is great. Let's record it. And so we sat at home for a whole day and recorded this demo. And when I was writing the lyrics for it, I remember this moment because at that point, I really moved to the US mostly to play shows, but I had to study in order to do that. So when I was studying, I was trying to play as many shows as I could. So I was taking and it started off with just open mics. So I would sign up for all of these open mics and just go and play them. And eventually I started to make connections and friends and stuff. And then the open mics started to turn into showcases, more singer-songwriter showcases. And at that point, when I had moved here, I was living in Hollywood because I was studying in Hollywood. I didn't have a car for about 2 years because everything was in this sort of 1 mile radius for the first few months. But then I started to play shows and I'm like, oh, there's these places are really far and LA doesn't have any sort of public transport. It does, but it's that excuse for it. And it takes you twice the amount of time to get to a place if you don't have a car yourself. So I would sit in these buses and these trains with my guitar, and I would take 2 hours to get to a place that would take you 30 minutes to drive to, and then back. So it would be a 4-hour journey just to play for 15 minutes and then come back, which I was doing for completely free. And at that point, now I think about it, whoa, this is crazy. But I remember going to one of these showcases, and it was an open mic sort of thing. I had put my guitar on, had this thing, and then I had to really plot out the way I get to this place, because on Google it tells you what buses come into what stop at what time. So I had all of this planned out, and I'm like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do. And then I had this slot for 7:30 p.m. At a place in Burbank, and to play for 15 minutes. And I'm waiting at the bus stop, and this bus just doesn't show up. And I remember being so broke at that time that I couldn't even take an Uber. And I'm like, oh my God, I might miss this. And I eventually did miss that slot. And I was so bummed about it. And I came back home without having played that show. And it was another hour back in that bus, in that train. And then I sat down, and I was so disillusioned by what LA had shown itself to be. And it wasn't what I thought it was, at least when I was making that decision to move. not that I expected some miraculous thing to happen, but it was just, I started to realize the extent of the work that I had to put in to sort of even get to the point where people know me or know my music. And so the song California is about it's unrequited love, but not towards a person. It's more towards a city, and I chose the name California, but it's more about Los Angeles, not California. California is a more singable word than Los Angeles. Like when you put it in a song, you just can't sing Los Angeles. So California just felt better to sing. Not that the rest of California is the same way. I don't know. I haven't lived in those places, but LA is definitely like that. At least at that point, it was. So yeah, that's what inspired. It was sad, and it was a very disillusioned feeling, and that's what I put into this. And when I put it into the song and the chord progression, it felt like a nice juxtaposition of sadness and this driving chord progression. So that's what it was.
And that's exactly what I got from that song too.
Right. Yeah. That is the idea behind it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a very hard thing to do also, because sometimes I listen to like certain songs and I wouldn't have watched the music video, and then I was like, whoa, I had no idea that the artist was kind of depicting that kind of pain or things like that. But when I did hear your song, I could feel, and I didn't know you then, I could really feel like kind of what Dr. Donna also was saying with your music.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for validating that.
It's not validating, it's the truth. But
and it's a very good song, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, our podcast interns like heard the song, and then they were like talking about it in our document, and then Dr. Donna is like, I want to listen to the song. Can you please like direct me to the song? And they really liked it too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I wanted to ask you, so I think like especially in like the media and like music, growing up, like especially like in India, or like even though we were exposed to like Western culture and things like that you've mentioned, I didn't really see like in like South Asian musicians kind of make it here in Western countries, right? Like some of your role models also are people of who are not South Asian, right? And so I guess what I'm trying to ask is, to see more South Asians in this space as a musician yourself, like what are you hoping for?
I just hope, honestly, that music is accepted. Good music is accepted regardless of what it looks like. People start to, especially now, people listen with their eyes a lot. It's just the commercialization of music in video form or reality TV show form. Everybody's like, oh, wow, this is so impressive because it has a fancy video attached to it. But, the music behind it is a different pursuit altogether. I hope that music is accepted regardless of what it looks like. I also hope for, and this is only something that I realized much later when I moved here and I'm a part of this industry now, be it performing or writing or creating, there is an imbalance, and it can be sort of generational, I think, in terms of what has been created or just the after effects of a system that was very imbalanced, and we're still feeling it. I'm very encouraged by how, at least in LA, how inclusive things are becoming, or at least they're trying to be. And I hope that it continues, because there's so much music that isn't being heard because of what it looks like, and going back to my statement, is that good music should be good music regardless of what it looks like. And a lot of times the music here is dominated by a certain um, by the way it looks or the way
You can say it.
it comes
Yeah,
from.
Just say
It's,
it.
right. It's dominated by race sometimes. And up until the 1980s, in 1983, I think it was, they had something called race records in the United States, where
Hmm.
African American musicians who are some of the best musicians I've met so far, and they really created music the way it's supposed to be and the way we listen to it. If you trace your music back to its origins, you'll find that Western music was really started by African American spirituals, which eventually turned into blues music, which then turned into so many different things. And there's a lot of music theory. I remember talking about it in my songwriting lessons at music school. One of our teachers was really cool. He would really trace the line back to where it actually started. But all of that was being created by this race of people, but they weren't allowed to share the same success, or not even close to the same amount of success that white people were, up until 1983, which is like 40 years ago. That's crazy to me, that you can segregate a whole race of people, even though they were the originators of this type of music. You would take this music and make it your own and brand it your way, and then profit off of that, and not let the actual creators do the same. That to me is crazy. And we're still feeling the after effects of that. There are people who profited a lot, who still sort of monopolize the industry. So I think, yeah, I hope for more inclusivity, and I see it happening, but not in a way that's substantial or deep. There's still more work and more dialogue to be had about this, and I hope it does happen. But at the very least, it is encouraging in the way it's moving. So I think that's my opinion on it.
Yeah. Our whole mission of the task force is, how do we create strength and solidarity, right? And I feel like you've kind of answered that in the music space, but still keeping in that space and answering that question to that space, and then later the broader community. What are some steps that musicians can take to increase cross-racial ethnic solidarity?
I think right now, musicians, even though it seems very lopsided in terms of who is in power and who is not, we do have a lot of power ourselves because of social media. And I think social media, it has its current, language right now. And there are people who are being encouraged because of being part of minorities, or just being people of color. And I really appreciate that. So I think sharing, and that's what I'm conflicted about. I don't want to say share music just because it's being made by a person of color or a minority. I don't know if that's doing the music the best service, because I would like anyone to share my music if it's good, because that'll tell me if it's good or not, or if it's being accepted or not. And it'll be accepted on a large scale. And I think if you truly believe that your music is good and substantial, it'll get out there and people will share it regardless. But I still, like I said, I'm conflicted about art being shared just because it's from a minority. We do require that exposure because it hasn't been given. But at the same time, I think some level of discernment has to be applied to it. So I think it's a balance of both. Being given a little bit more exposure, and the vein of trying to share someone's music or someone's art, because, or even I think it crosses over to businesses. It crosses over to restaurants, that are minority owned or owned by people of color. That is something that I love visiting. And, if I have to go out, I try to choose places like that. But it's also because the food and the places are great. So I think the same applies to the music. I do want to share a lot of stuff that are a lot of art that's made by people of color, but I also want to do the music some service and apply a level of discernment in terms of whether it's quality content or not. You know? So yeah, I don't have a very good answer to that question.
No, that's a pretty good answer. Like, and I respect that completely.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know that you've worked with various artists and producers of music. Anybody in particular that we may know of, or I know that you've also have written some songs for folks.
Right. I don't know if you know them. So that's the thing about, when I did my final year of studying vocal performance in Musicians Institute in Hollywood, they have this one quarter where you can do an internship with someone outside of the industry, and so someone in the industry but outside of school. And they have a list of people that they have connections with that they can set you up with. And most people would choose these record labels that they could go into and somehow find some sort of work in there, and convert that. I was really specific about choosing someone who was independent and not attached to these big labels, because they can be like companies. You know, it's a very big thing. And I remember working, and I chose this one person. He goes by the name of Hookman, but his name is Marlon Vaughn. And I remember choosing him because he was this great songwriter. I listened to his stuff and I'm like, okay, then he called me to like the Starbucks, and we had this interview in the Starbucks, and I literally had to give him my music, and he put his headphones on, he heard it, he was like, okay, cool, we can do this. And then what we did was, he already had his label, which was a very small label. He had just established it at the time, and he had signed like a couple of artists. But he was writing for some really big names at that point. He was writing for Chris Brown and Swiss Beats, Alicia Keys' husband, and a bunch of other people. He was writing for movies and TV at that point. And so he was on an upward trajectory, and I wanted to really learn what it was like to do this. And but he had this other idea. He wanted to start this social media platform, which basically shines a light on the behind the scenes people in pop music. So when you're listening to music, when you're listening to the radio, you're hearing a lot of these hit songs that are probably on the charts right now. We had not many people actually know who actually wrote these songs and who produced these songs. They know who's singing the songs. They know the artists that are, singing these songs, but not the people that are writing it, because it's not almost always not the same. And so what we did was we created this social media platform called Who Wrote That Song? And all we did was we wanted it to be this encyclopedia of songwriters and producers and engineers who are behind the scenes of hit music. And my first task in doing that was like, I needed to go through every single like Billboard chart from 1985 to 2000, and at that point, 2017 or 18. And find out the songwriters and producers and who they were and who wrote these songs. And I started to notice this pattern of like how the songwriters were so diverse and so many different songwriters, all the way up until like 98, when the boy band started to come up, and then pop music started to become really pop. And then Katy Perry and all those guys, those artists started to come up. And then I started to notice this really interesting thing that happened where almost all of these hit songs from 2005 to 2020, 2017 at that point, they were written by just like 20% of the songwriters in the business. And then it started to get smaller and smaller until the point that it was just these same people writing the same music and writing these hit songs. And people started to wonder why, music sounds the same. It's because it's written by the same people that are constantly bought. So for me, I have worked with people like that aren't known, and for me, that's just the most gratifying part of it, is that I get to meet these people that are creating pop music and the way you listen to it. And so I got to meet a lot of songwriters and producers, but Marlon is definitely one of them. And yeah, going through, there's a bunch of them, but more not super famous people. They're more writers and creators. Yeah.
But those are usually the best kinds, because I actually like to look at the lyrics of the song. Right. I'm one of those folks who are like, I'm very curious because I'm more about the words than the beats.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so I do tend to look at who wrote that song. Because
Nice.
to me, music is just poetry with a beat behind it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There are big camps of songwriters for hit artists now. There's like 20 songwriters in the room for writing a Beyonce song or a Rihanna song. Yeah, and yeah, it's a big business right now.
Yeah. But I like, I mean, it kind of goes back to some of, even like this, like, was it an internship? Okay.
It was, which eventually turned into a partnership.
Yeah. So like, I mean, you were at school, and I think it goes back to, the way you answered that question of what you want to see more in the field of, and you did answer that question really well. So I don't know why you said, I hope I'm answering it well, because you really spoke to like the performative culture that exists in society. And
that's a great word. Yeah.
Yeah. And you spoke to also, music cannot be discriminated by race, ethnicity, caste, culture, religion, and things like that. And you really highlighted, if you're listening to something, just listen to the music and, like truly understand that, truly feel the energy of it. And I think it's very inspiring that you did not go that traditional route. And even the people that you chose to collaborate with, you really wanted to, understand who are these people behind it and how can I be part of that?
Right. Yeah, I agree. Honestly, when it's posed like this and the question is structured like this, looking back, yes, but at those points, I didn't have any foresight of doing this stuff. Like I would just go with my instinct most of the time, and that's how I've lived my life mostly. Is just jump into it. Like whatever feels good, just make it your life, and that's what I've done so far. And so when even with doing this internship and stuff, it just felt instinctively right to meet this person and to see what he's in, because I knew where I was going, and like and I just liked his music, and that's what drove me to it. So it's a feeling more than analytical or just analyzing things that drives me.
Yeah, but it's important, like no matter what profession you're in, to trust your instinct, right? To trust your feeling and to pursue that. And so we have like one last question for you. And
actually, I have one more before you ask the last question. This is not at all very important, just to let you know. I was just really curious. Did you get your engineering degree?
I did. I don't know. It's the most useless piece of paper in my room. Because I have no idea about it.
I was wondering, like, did he pursue did he finish the engineering, or did he kind of shifted?
That was the deal with my parents, right? And you get a degree, and then you can do what you want. But I have no idea about mechanical engineering. If you ask me anything about it, I have no idea about what it is. So the thing is, I say it's useless, but it really strengthened my love for music more. I think that's a big part of me growing up, was not being allowed to do what I wanted to do in the scale that I wanted to do it, or just being actively discouraged. It strengthened my love to do it so much more. And I honestly have this question that occurs to me sometimes. It's like, would I have actually done it this much if I was allowed to? I don't know. I really don't know. So this is the way my life has shaped up to be. So
it also shows your resiliency too, that no matter what, you still continued on with that path,
Yeah, that I think is definitely one of my greatest strengths, is my tenacity. I know that about myself.
Yeah. And I'm glad you asked that question back, but I mean, it also speaks to, earlier we spoke about like colonization and the generational things that exist, right? Especially within like immigrant families, where choose the path of a doctor, choose the path of a lawyer, an engineer, because you need to be financially stable, or like things like that. And I think it's amazing how you still advocated for what you wanted, and pursued a path that in a foreign country where, I mean, we do have a lot of so Saahas and I know have a lot of common friends back in India, but we only met here when I was visiting one of my friends in LA, and I don't know any people from the city we're from in India who are coming out here and have made it as far as you have. So I think it's amazing that you're just even doing that in the space that you're in.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you. It is kind of tough, and that's something I didn't mention is now as a performer, when I perform in these spaces that I perform in, they're exclusively white spaces, and nobody that looks like me is doing what I do on stage. It's either white people or black people. So when they see a brown person up on stage, I think the first reaction is just to be really confused. What is this guy about? Shouldn't he be my doctor, or shouldn't he be working in IT right now? And why is he on stage in this sparkly jacket? And then so there is that weirdness that comes with performing at these spaces which are exclusively white, and you're a brown person. But again, you have to adopt this thick skin to get through this stuff. You have to say, screw it, I'm gonna just do my thing. And because if you let it, that stuff can really get to you, especially in a performance context. The reactions are so immediate. There's no filter. The audience is looking at the performer, and then the body language is so evident about what they feel. And so that can lead to a lot of anxious moments on stage where it takes you out of your body and more into your mind. You're like, oh my God, what are they thinking? What are they doing? Am I doing this well? Am I doing that well? And then you start to posture a little bit, but then you have to remind yourself that, okay, this is music, and let's get back into your body. And so yeah, you do have to have some thick skin to do a lot of thick skin to do what I'm doing. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's because I feel like with the ways it intersects it's that mind, body, and energy component. So as soon as you get on stage, you can feel all that nonverbal cues that you're seeing, and some of the microaggressions that come with that. So continue to do what you're doing, and thank you for everything that you're doing. And so as we're kind of wrapping up, what advice do you have for the younger generation, both musicians and non-musicians? And if you could meet your younger self, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh man. This is something I actively explore in therapy, is talking to my younger self. And what I would say, because a big part of my 20s was dictated by not being able to access my inner child or just know what happened to that boy. I was a very sensitive kid growing up and very emotional, and that's probably why I was so drawn to music. And that was shut off a lot during my formative years, in my teen years and high school and everything. But I kept going with it, but I also had to develop this thick skin. What I would say to my younger self, to answer the last part of your question, is that you're valuable. You don't have to fight to prove your talent. You don't have to fight to prove or to be validated by the people around you. It was so hard for me to see that value growing up, and it still is sometimes. It's just the remnants of the conditioning that I'm used to. But I tell myself that what you're doing is amazing. You've done a lot. You've come a long way, all through the passion that you harbored when you were growing up. And so all of this sensitivity, all of this emotional confusion that you're feeling, that isn't sort of being responded to in any way, not from your parents, not from your friends, but only in music, that is going to make you who you are. So don't run away from that. That's what I would tell my younger self. To musicians and non-musicians, younger people that are, well, firstly for musicians, especially younger musicians, just really get good at your craft. That's important. I think it's really easy to lose sight of that in the way we live and the way we listen to music, the way we watch music right now. It's driven by social media. but really get deeper into the craft of music and songwriting, and stop to ask yourself if you can be better in whatever it is that you're doing, because that's what's going to take you further. It's just being better and trying to get better at what you do. It's not getting, although it might seem like that's what gives you longevity, is these large number of followers or looking a certain way on social media. It's not substantial. It's not deep. It doesn't really last long. And so I would say that if you get to the point where you're really famous for no reason, it's going to lead to a whole bunch of trouble. But if you have something to bank on, which is your craft or your art, that's something that you need to get deep with. So that's something I would tell younger musicians. Don't stop getting deeper with it. To non-musicians, I'm in the same boat, I guess. We're just figuring things out every day with our emotions. And I for me, for whatever reason, I like being vulnerable, and I like uncovering layers. So I guess right now, there is so much advice that I can give, but right now where I'm at and the things that I'm going through, I think be open to being vulnerable, because it leads to better things. That's what I would tell everyone, musician, non-musician, my younger self. I think that's sort of guides it.
Thank you for those wise words.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful because, especially growing up, as a South Asian, and not even just a South Asian, I think even in the larger Asian diaspora, we're not really taught how to show our emotions or express our emotions, or it's something that you learn as an adult, like moving countries or being exposed to different cultures and things like that. And I also really liked how you said, you talk to your inner child in therapy, and really normalizing that, hey, it's okay to show your emotions regardless of gender or ethnicity and things like that, and honor your emotions and be vulnerable and express yourself. So thank you so much for being here with us today, and very grateful to have had this conversation with you.
Thank you. And it's nice meeting you.
And nice meeting you too, and continue the great work that you guys are doing. It is awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to our podcast today. We hope you enjoyed the episode. For more information about today's guests and their social media links, you can click on the description links of the episode. Pooja Mami Dana and Dr. Dana Demanarig host this podcast. Our podcast team includes our podcast interns, Alexis Rios from the University of North Texas in Denton, Texas, and Petra Zadroga from Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts. We also want to acknowledge our production team, David DeVito and Rachel Sheffer.
If you would like to know more about us or to watch video clips of this interview, then follow us on Instagram at APADiv45_Presidential Task Force, on TikTok and X at APADiv45_Coakley, or on YouTube and Facebook at Dr. Kevin Coakley's APA Division 45 Presidential Task Force.
Strength and solidarity. The strength and solidarity.